I'm always fascinated by science and by scientists who are constantly pushing to learn more, to know more, to figure out more about this unique and amazing world that we live in, that God created. And, they're always trying to tackle, to answer the difficult questions, to figure out how to make our lives either better or so that we better understand, so that we can live in light of that knowledge. And so one of the pressing questions that I know that you have and I have, that scientists are really working on and have done a lot of research on, is how can we more effectively, more quickly, and better forget things, right? See, the way that you forget things now is clunky and doesn't really do all that you want it to do. What you've been thinking is saying, I want to forget things a lot faster, a lot smoother, a lot cleaner. Well, guess what? Science has your answer. They're ready to go. As they are studying the brain and discovering these things called glial cells that work to in between the neurons in your brain, and these glial cells, some of them work to help strengthen those connections, strengthen that knowledge and that understanding, but some of them work like gardeners, pruning out all the pieces you don't need. So as you sleep, scientists have discovered that your brain shrinks, and there is room for these cells, these gardeners, to come in and to trim out the stuff that you don't need. So, and I promise you this is 100% true. Yesterday, when I read about this, and you all laughed, so you do too, you go, the one thing I don't need help doing is forgetting things, right? Let's figure out the opposite of it. Yesterday, we took Piper. Piper's birthday is coming up on Thursday, and so we, yes. When she's, are you even listening right now? No? Okay, fantastic. Awesome. So, you're just embarrassed. Okay, that's what it is. All right. So, we took Piper and two of her friends, and Andy and Sarah and I, and we went to see the new My Little Pony movie. So who else went? Yeah, I see okay, all right. So we went to see the new My Little Pony movie, and it's at the Harbor Center. And as you're on that road, Solomon's Island, right? On that road, there is a restaurant right before you get to the Harbor Center, coming from Annapolis Town Center. There's a restaurant right there on the right. As you are going to that restaurant, now this is a restaurant that we have gone to as a church before when we've gone to go see movies. This restaurant I've been to several times. And so I am driving the car with all of us in it, and we pull out of the neighborhood, and Sarah goes, okay, you know where we're going? And I go, yeah, Cece's. And I go, what? No. See, Cece's is the bad pizza buffet place that you go to when you're not happy with life. And then, okay, so it's not Cece's, and I go, oh gosh, that's embarrassing. Chi-Chi's. Yep, that's where I'm going. And we turn onto Bellerive and turn onto College Parkway, and my wife, who loves me, is staring at me like this. And she goes, that's not right either, right? And I go, yeah, it's called Chevy's, isn't it? It's called Chevy's, yes. It's called Chevy's. And she does that look that you do when you love someone and are sort of just letting them stew in their own embarrassment, like, okay. So we get on 50, and she goes, you take the Solomon's Island Road exit, right? You get off there. And I literally, without thinking about it, go, why do you think you need to tell? Okay, no, I get it. I understand. That makes sense. And so, there's these sorts of moments that these things just sort of fall out of your head, right? You don't need it. It's not important. It falls out. The problem is that those sorts of things, when they're about names of restaurants, are no big deal. But we don't just forget things like that. Humans forget all sorts of stuff. We forget all sorts of important stuff. And I don't mean important stuff like Social Security numbers. That's important. We forget important stuff like identity kind of stuff. As we are continuing to walk through the Old Testament, last week we talked about Moses and God calling Moses and saying, yes, it's not under your power, it's under my power that you will lead these people out of Egypt. that I am the God who was in the past, who is in the present, and who will be in the future, and it is through my power that you will lead them. And sure enough, God did. Moses did. Moses went to Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world, and said, guess what? Your unpaid labor force needs to go, and you just need to let them go, okay? And Pharaoh goes, yeah, I don't see that happening. And then plagues came on Egypt, one after another, 10 of them. In fact, the 10th was the death of the firstborn over every house and every family and every animal that wasn't sheltered under a house that had the blood of a lamb on it. The blood of the lamb caused the angel of death to pass over that house. Everyone from Pharaoh's firstborn son all the way down throughout the entire country lost their firstborn. From there, Pharaoh says, go, take your people and go. So Moses and the Israelites head out, and and God leads them to the Red Sea. As they are at the Red Sea, they look around. Pharaoh's changed his mind and has brought an army with him to encourage the Israelites to come back. The Red Sea opens up, and God says to Moses, that's the way you're going. So imagine being one of these slaves. All you've ever known your entire life is slavery. And all of a sudden, there is this night that you have no idea what's going on, but all these people have died and all these families around you. You've packed up whatever you can. You are now walking. You walk to the edge of the water. Great planning. Good job. We can't walk through water. And God opens up the water. And you are walking and seeing water on both sides, assuming. And the army is coming behind you. As all of the Israelites get across, the army comes in, God closes the waves over the army, and they are washed away. After all of this, you are then led into the desert by God. How are you led into the desert? There's not a GPS. There's a gigantic pillar of fire that leads you. Follow that thing. Okay, fair enough. I could not get lost with that. That's excellent. They go and they go, but again, they're in the desert, and there's a whole bunch of them. And so they look around and they go, there's nothing to drink. It's the desert. So God says to Moses, take your staff, strike this rock. I will take care of my people. This is immediately before the passage we are just about to read. Moses takes the staff, strikes the rock. Water comes flowing out of the desert, this pure water they can drink. Time after time after time after time, God has protected, saved, redeemed, and cared for these Hebrew people. Every single time. So they are incredibly grateful and incredibly thankful and incredibly humble. And that's what you'll read about with me in Exodus chapter 16, starting in verse 1. If you want to follow along in a Bible, you can find one underneath your seat. Otherwise, you are welcome to listen as we read Exodus chapter 16, starting in verse 1. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. So remember when I said they were humble and all that stuff? It's sort of the opposite of that. The Israelites said to them, this is fantastic, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into the desert. You have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. So we just need to pause here because this is amazing. All the Hebrew scholars out there will remember that when all of these Israelite Hebrew people were in Egypt, what condition were they in, Hebrew scholars? Slaves, very good. So, they are now out here in the desert, And they are saying, oh, you know what was awesome? You know what was just the best thing ever? Slavery. That just, you know what was great? And here's what they're saying about it. We got to sit around pots of meat. We got to eat whatever we wanted. That was just the best. I can't believe, Moses, you led us out here to die. Okay, so first of all, in any sort of form of slavery, but certainly in this sort of, the passages we read in Exodus, there was not a lot of sitting around. There was certainly not a lot of sitting around big pots of meat where they were having like just this big feast. There was a lot of heartache, a lot of toil, a lot of hopelessness. And yet, here in this moment and in this place, all they can do is go, you know what was awesome was the good old days. I can't believe the pain and the problem we're facing right now. This is the worst thing that has ever happened, and there's no hope. How on earth is anything good going to come from this? You've just led us out here to die. Okay? Now, before we start piling on the Hebrew people too much, this is the same problem that I have when I read stuff about the disciples. Because you hear about the disciples, and you hear about the disciples squabbling and grumbling as they are walking around with Jesus. And there is the initial part of me that goes, come on, you're with Jesus, right? Like, what is wrong with you? And then, I remember me. And I remember when I tell people, you know, as you meet people and as you start, and they start getting to know them, and they start asking you about your story, so you start talking about the different highlights and the different points in your life. And as I was doing that recently, it sort of dawned on me again how many times God had showed up in my world in ways that didn't make sense, that were unexplained, that even in that moment did not feel like a blessing. But yet, looking back on it, was the hand of God working and redeeming and saving time after time after time. And yet, I am chief among sinners of people who like to complain. So it gives me pause before I start piling on the Israelites too much. Because just as they complain, presents us with the opportunity not to go, what's wrong with you guys? But for us to pause and think and go, uh-oh, maybe we're talking about me here, and it's going to get uncomfortable. All right. Verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. Now remember, they did not come to Moses or come to God and say, oh, benevolent Lord, we love you so much and we have given our best to you. Please give us gifts, right? They're throwing a temper tantrum. And God says, you know what? I'll take care of it. Which is what you'd say to the parent, no, you let them sit in their temper tantrum for a while, right? But God says, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them to see whether they will follow my instructions. And of course, all of the Israelites followed his instructions to the T, and there was never any problems ever again. Oh, wait, no. Okay, on the sixth day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us? Moses also said, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening, and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You're not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses told Aaron, say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Do you notice grumbling showing up several times? I wonder why that is. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening quail came and covered the camp, just like it always does in the desert every day. And in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Each of you is to gather as much as you need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little. Each one gathered as much as they needed. All right, so here's some free verses for you. Verse 19. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. All right? So, I love this story. I love this story. This may be one of my favorite stories in the entire Bible, certainly in the Old Testament, and that's for several reasons. One, God provides in this miraculous, unbelievable, unexpected way, and yet what God provided, it is said, were these flakes that looked like frost that you were supposed to gather up. And literally, they looked at each other and said, what is that? You know, the worst thing you can say to someone who cooks you a meal is, "Oh, what is it?" Right? Like, that's a good way to get it flipped in your face, right? Like, "Oh, that looks... oh," you know, that sort of thing. And there's going, "Oh, what is it?" This is a ridiculous, ridiculous thing. In my first church, I kept calling it Holy Frosted Flakes. And several older people asked me to stop doing that. And they did not like it. But I said, no, this is what it is. It is ridiculous. And that God said, "Here is what it is, and here's what I have provided for you." It wasn't exactly what they would have expected. No one was asking, right, for Holy Frosted Flakes. Nobody was saying, "You know what we really need right now?" But God provided, and God continued to provide for 40 years, something like 14,000 days. God continued to provide over and over and over and over. How amazing is that? The second piece of this that I always find interesting is God doesn't just plop down the loaf, right? Because God's just making up these rules as God goes along, right? God could have done anything. God said, all of this stuff's going to be on the ground, and you're going to have to go out and collect it. God doesn't just say, when you wake up in the morning, right outside your tent, it's going to be the easy, in the microwavable container, the small little loaf just ready for you to zap and go. You're going to be good to go. Everything's going to be fine. No, there is this element where they were required to go out and to get, go out and to gather, go out and work in order for them to be tested as to whether they believed in what God was going to do. And the third part, the part that it just kicks this over the top every time for me, is there is an immediate shelf life on this manna, right? There is this sense where it is human nature, and I read those extra verses because it is totally human nature for someone or lots of someones to go, "Okay, this is what I need for today. This is enough. This is just enough for today. I'm just going to grab a little bit more, and we'll just put that aside for tomorrow," right? That's going to be fine, no big deal. Everything's good. So they ate this part, they show up the next day, and it's filled with maggots, which isn't that just, I mean, you don't see that cross-stitched on a pillow often enough. Like you, this sense of it's not only just sort of turned or off a little, or does this milk smell funny to you sort of level. This is like, get it away from me because death has come in. Right? This idea that God has given you just enough for today. Now, it could be like God to set up the rules where, yep, you've got a 24-hour shelf life on this, ready, go. But that's not how God does it, because also God says, except on the 6th day. On the 6th day, collect 2 times what you need. and it'll be good. Because the seventh day was what? The seventh day was Sabbath. The seventh day was rest. So even in this way that God has created things, God has instilled, even in this miraculous food that shows up, you stop on the seventh day. You don't even have to collect it. You collect everything you need on the sixth day, and that second helping is still good to go for the seventh. There is so much here for us. There is so much here that we could think, reflect, wrestle with, and unpack. So first of all, the blessings that God gives to you every single day don't always look exactly like blessings, right? How many times in your own life have you gone, what is it? What is this? What are we doing? What does this even look like? What does this even mean? And it winds up being a blessing. Every day, God provides, and God provides enough, and God shows up every single day. But the second piece of this is God doesn't just plop all of that sort of spiritual maturity down in your lap, right? That God invites you into faithfulness, invites you into belief. Not because God wants to play gotcha, but because there is a real question about trust and faith. If you collect this amount for today, but you just put a little bit more aside for tomorrow, what are you saying about God? God may not provide for tomorrow, right? You're saying, I need to be covered just in case God doesn't show up tomorrow morning, or God sleeps in, or God suddenly decides not to be God like we've known. So, when you get just what you need for today, when you get just enough for today, what you are having to say over and over and over, every single day in fact, is that I believe God will provide for me tomorrow. I believe God will show up tomorrow, and I believe that the same God who loves me today will be the God who loves me tomorrow and will cover me and give me just enough for tomorrow as well. Jesus, in his prayer that he teaches his disciples and he teaches us, says that what you are to ask for is daily bread. There is no way that you can Costco your faith. There is no way that you can go and get 3 pallets of bread so you're good to go. I have now gone to church. I've now gotten the gold star. I even went to Sunday school. Woo! I got the pallet of faith, and I'm ready and I'm good to go. I can probably sleep in next week. I'm good, right? Like I can just sort of coast off of this for a while. It is every single day, because that is what faith looks like. It is an everyday kind of practice. It's not a once a week. It's not a twice a week. It is an everyday that you show back up and you say, I believe and I trust that you will give me just enough for today, and I will show back up tomorrow and ask for the same thing again. There is so much here that continues to shape and speak and work and teach us that it is an everyday sort of practice. It is an everyday sort of thing. And my question to you is, where are you every day coming to God? Where are you every day saying, God, I believe that today you will give me just enough? Or do you fall in the trap of our world that says we need more and bigger and other? All my food doesn't fit in the fridge, so I'm going to get a freezer and another fridge, and I'm going to get a storage unit for all the stuff that doesn't fit in the garage, because the cars don't fit in the garage because there's too much stuff in the garage. So I need to get a car carrier on top of the car because we all have to take all of the stuff that doesn't fit over to the... Do you believe there is just enough for today, and that you can come back tomorrow and God will continue to show up day after day after day? Do you believe that that's who God is? Do you believe in a God who is faithful to you in the midst of your own desert, in the midst of your own chaos, in the midst of your own struggle and pain and uncertainty and wandering around seemingly aimlessly? Do you believe that God will show up? Today, tomorrow, the next day, every day after that. The story of manna is an invitation for the Israelites and a challenge for us to believe in this God who loves you enough to give you just enough for today, and celebrates when you show up tomorrow and ask for the same. And celebrates when you show up tomorrow and ask for the same. Not just 40 years, but forever, for the rest of your life. This is what God invites you to in the way of faith that God calls for you. Those scientists that figured out how to better delete stuff out of your brain, you know what else they figured out? There is a way that you can hack those glial cells so that you can make sure that the ones that you don't care about, like hypothetically a Mexican restaurant everybody already knows how to get to that you don't need a name for, hypothetically. Those things that you don't need, there is a way that you can sort of trigger your brain to let that stuff be the stuff that filters out and the other stuff be the stuff that strengthens. And you know what it is? The things that you spend time thinking about every single day are the things that don't get pruned. The stuff that you only think about occasionally is what gets signaled to your brain. This isn't important. I need to shuffle this out. So when you think about God every single day, you are working against the temptation of us to forget. You are working against the temptation we have to always sort of think it's about us. We have to do it in big, huge sizes, and we have to hold on because I'm in this alone. When you think and go to God every single day and believe that God will give you just enough for today, part of what happens is that it strengthens so much that you are less likely to forget the next day, and less likely to forget the day after that. And that's not a mistake or a coincidence of science, that's God too. This is what God has created, a system and a world and a body and a brain that invites you every single day to show up and say, God, I believe and I trust, give me just enough for today. Would you pray with me? God, may this be our prayer, that we have and do as a body and as individuals. May we have just enough for today, God. May you show us who we are called to be, what we are called to do, how we are called to serve, and God, help us never forget your love and your goodness and your faithfulness that we see most clearly in Jesus, the one who lived and died and rose again. For it's in his name we pray. Amen.